Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy also your dinner. It's for me a pleasure to introduce this site event and to introduce the work of Barbara and Ulrike. I had yesterday a site event on Knowledge Gateway, and what I was mentioned is that as my previous life as a policymaker, we realized how high is the cost of taking decisions without the right information. So when trying to draft the Spanish feed-in tariff without having the real information of the cost of the technology or an expectation of the learning curve for the cost of the technology, at the end, you develop policies that will have a huge, in this case, negative macroeconomic impacts. We've been cooperating with International Energy Agency, Renewable Energy Technology Deployment. I think this is the group that has more advanced all the work on methodologies to estimate the macroeconomic impact. That has been always very inclusive with Irina, very cooperative with Irina, and this is why it's a pleasure for me to introduce this site event. So once again, thank you for always the role that you have played since the beginning with us, for being such inclusive and supportive with us, and congratulations also for the work and for the chapter on methodologies that I think is impressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really nice.
It's a pleasure to present here.
It's a pleasure to be here, and well, since this is thought for food and thought for the stomach, we thought of a bit of a different format for you. Because, I mean, this is not going to be a presentation slide after slide after slide after slide and a lot of equations and formula and data, because we had the feeling you might not really be up to that while you are eating. And so we are, as Hugo said, I mean, we thought about, well, what is there are slides, actually, but still. And I hope there are slides that you can roughly read, but you have a nice reader in front of you. When you move the food a bit to the side and you cannot really read a slide, then you can, just take a glance at your reader. And we have been thinking about, well, actually our everyday experience. What are the questions that a policymaker is faced with? And we thought to do this a bit like a question and answer session between us. So one takes the role of the policymaker, and the other one takes the role that we usually have in our everyday working life. We just take the role of the consultant, policy analyst, and the one who knows it all. So, and since since we want to have an equal opportunity to be the know-it-all, we just switch in between. Okay, so that's the concept, and I have the benefit of starting. And looking back to years and years of policy recommendations and being a consultant, we meanwhile also know there is like a lot of, not all the bad policies that we see are actually deliberately formed. There's a lot of different issues that policymakers feel they have to deal with when they create a policy that supports renewable energy, either deployment or anything around that, and all the policies that we've heard earlier this morning. So there's the impact on the industry. There's how can we attract foreign investment. There is, oh my God, in some developing countries where I've been, is the security of supply. Can we actually have like a bit more stable security of supply? This is actually this feels like a very secure and very stable electricity supply in this country. I've been using slides all day long and they never vanished. I went to Nigeria, for instance, and there a talk like that would be, on the next slide you could have seen, if we had light, you could have seen this and that. So the security of supply issues are actually in a lot of countries in the world a major issue, especially in the strongly growing economies where the supply is just a bit lagging behind demand. So that's a major issue. Well, we shouldn't be, among all these socioeconomic issues, we shouldn't be forgetting climate change. I mean, why are we doing all this, right? I mean, there are environmental issues, there is too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and there are climate change issues. And then, on the other hand, on the more economic side, There is, of course, prices. A lot of developing countries, and I'm trying to focus on developing countries more here, because some people felt that the first session was a bit focused on Europe and the industrial countries, and now we are also trying to get some developing countries aspect in that. Now, the cost of energy in a lot of developing countries that I know are subsidized. So how do you get the prices right in those countries? That's an issue. Where's Rula? Oh, she just is out of the room, okay. That's an issue. No, there she is, on cue. That was really good. That's an issue. Subsidies is an issue we've been talking a lot. Energy price subsidies in certain countries, and how can you attract energy efficiency if the prices are not right? So all these things are going through the mind of a policymaker. But in the center, there's, in a lot of developing and industrial countries, there is, well, what does it do to the economy? What will it be doing to jobs? Are there job losses? Are there whatevers? And that's where we start.
Exactly, that's where we start. We focus on jobs, on economic development, and so we start with our dialogue. My first question to you, Ulrike, is how many jobs will be created if we build a wind farm in our country?
Well, I'm a good consultant. My answer is, it depends.
Great.
I do want to earn money with it, don't I? Well, but sure. I mean, seriously, it does depend. It depends on where we are, which country we look at. It depends on your country's capabilities. We talked about production this morning. Can you produce any wind turbines in your country? Can you produce parts of a wind turbine? You have a steel industry? Don't look, I mean, do you have a steel industry? Do you have people who can install a wind farm? Most countries that I've been to have a construction sector, at least. I mean, there's houses everywhere, so they do have a construction sector. So do you have the qualifications that you could actually set up a wind farm, do the construction, or could you actually install a wind farm? And once it's there, it needs to be operated. So, do you have the people who can operate a wind farm and maintain it? I mean, Marlene this morning was pointing out operation and maintenance is really, really important. And then, well, operating is one thing, but a lot of the grids, and now I'm talking also from an industrial country's perspective, they need to know when there will be wind electricity. So, do we have people who do the wind forecast? Can you balance electricity generation and demand?
Oh, Ricky, these are many, many answers, but how do I know what matters? And
well,
could you give us some idea?
Okay, I try. There is the economic concept of the value chain, which basically means that you just look along the production process or along the process where value is generated. And this is not as Marxist as it sounds. I mean, value generation is a very old economic concept, and at each level where you produce something from inputs that you had before, you create value, and that's basically what you pay people from, actually. You know, from this additional value, you can sell it on the market, and you should pay your salaries, and when you're really lucky, you also have some profits. Now, let me illustrate what I mean with this. For instance, at the level of equipment manufacturing and distribution, you have a lot of different inputs. You have steel, copper for cables, for instance, but you also have a lot of services that usually are forgotten. Usually people think of things, right, of like tangible things, but you also have a lot of services at pretty much any level of this value chain. So in the equipment manufacturing, you have people who have an engineering degree and just do the first, I don't know, they draw things, they project things, all these things. Project actually is a different step, is a new step of the next step of the value chain. In a lot of countries nowadays, you do need environmental analysis when you put up a large-scale project. We are not talking about rooftop PV here, but for instance, a large PV farm, a large wind farm, you need to do some kind of environmental analysis also, and there's can be a lot of jobs in services, because that's high-tech jobs, but you only need an office for that. You don't need to build a huge plant and set up major initial investment, but that's doing the environmental analysis, for instance. That's what high qualified people, for instance, in the MENA region. You have the problem that there is a lot of people who do have university degrees, but they don't have jobs. That might be an interesting part for them. So on the next stop then, the construction and installation, well, there's a lot of jobs involved. You have to think about transport, which doesn't really sound like a renewable energy job at all, you know. You're driving a truck, hey. But if something on the back of the truck is just the blade, and that's a large truck, I tell you. I mean, if something on the back of the truck is a blade for a wind farm, for a wind park, then you are having a renewable energy job. And there's drivers in all the countries where I've been to. I mean, truck drivers is just something people really do, and they do a lot. You have all the financial services, the banks that give credit, that give loans. You have all the services in between. If you have like tax gatherers, tax administration, tax consultants, assuming people pay taxes. Otherwise, you have them too, but they are not really having a lot of work to do. And that all goes into construction and installation, apart from what you would usually think is construction and installation. So then on the next step, I think I already talked about that, operation and maintenance. You have the prognosis, you have people who send out the bills, do the billing for renewable electricity, all these things. And we don't really know much about the last phase, because renewable energy is rather young, so it hasn't died, you know. So we don't know anything about dismantling of the facilities. Now, to make this a bit more easy and comprehensible, you can say the people in the blue arrows down there, they know they work for renewable energy. The people that provide the inputs, sometimes they don't know that they work in the renewable energy industry. But then again, you may ask, why should I count them? Well, what you want to know is, what's the next slide?
Next slide is the question.
No, okay, the sentence is good.
That's my question. I wanted to ask you, let's assume we import the turbines.
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
But my country, or our country, can install, operate, and maintain the wind farm, for example. So could you tell me how many jobs we can get from that? Because you all mentioned many things, many points we have to think about, which matters, but I'd like to have a figure.
A figure? Well, actually, it depends. Would you take like 2 figures, maybe? Or 3?
Or 4?
I know. Well, as I said, there is a lot of jobs that is involved in the setting up of a wind park, in the renewable energy deployment. And I was faced with exactly your question. In a lot of countries, and the policymaker there had heard about long-term jobs and short-term jobs and wanted to know what that is. Well, to make a long story short, I start with the short. The short-term jobs is everything that is, for instance, the truck driver that drives the blade to the wind farm, and then it's set up. Well, he can drive, I don't know, it's 3 blades per turbine, so you just multiply 3 times however turbines you're going to install. That's as many trips as he's going to do, and that's it. That's the end of this particular truck driver's job, unless you have more wind farms in your country. But that's, I don't know, that takes maybe half a year or something like that. He's employed, he has a very responsible position, but that's the end of that story. Long term, and I really agree with Marlene this morning, long term is everything that is coming after the wind park has been installed. Or, and this is an important or, long term can also be that you have chances to, for instance, export your technology. For instance, Germany does and did that. It's a bit difficult to take. Well, let's take China. China's always good, for example. So China exports a lot and installs a lot. So in production, you have a lot of, at least for the time span being, we have been observing a lot of jobs that have been more long-term than just your average truck driver. So, but generally, operation and maintenance is something that is really stable, and anything that comes with renewable energy deployment, if the deployment increases, and it's really important to take that demand side.
Okay, but you mentioned, you asked how many figures I'd like to know. I mean, there are different figures about jobs. For example, direct jobs, or indirect, and induced jobs. And that's
so the Mrs. and Mr. Know-it-all switch places.
Because yes, many times you talk about direct jobs or indirect jobs and induced jobs. And for this, to explain that, I like the picture you used before, this one. Ha. That's a good one. Because direct jobs are those jobs or those people who work, for example, in the PV module manufacturer, or who work in a project development company, or who does work in a construction company. These are all jobs that are directly related to the investment, construction, manufacturing, operation, maintenance of this wind farm. So all jobs at that level are direct jobs at a renewable energy industry level. The indirect jobs are those jobs upstream of the renewable energy industry level, and we call that indirect jobs because, as Ulrike said, sometimes they even don't know that they work for the renewable energy sector. And there's a third group of jobs. These are the induced effects. And they're very often forgotten because they do not directly affect the industry at that level, at the production level.
I just wanted to get you the induced effects.
But they affect the industry through income or changes in consumption. So they have their impact or starting point at a consumption industry. If households can spend more or less income for other goods besides electricity, they induce demand and so production and so employment. These are the three types of effects, and they're important.
So I get 5 numbers, or what?
Yes, you get 5 numbers. Long-term, short-term, direct, indirect, and induced.
Now, okay, I can handle 5 numbers, but then I have this. We also this morning, I think it was also our colleague from China who said, well, but there's conventional energy, and that will be hurt. So, is it all good news about renewable energy? Are there negative effects?
Of course, they're not always only good news. I mean, they have also some negative effects. But let's first focus on the positive one. As I said, we have positive effects through investment at the manufacturing sector, in the renewable energy sector. Of course, if we have renewable energies, we need maybe less energy from conventional sector. So we have maybe a decrease in investment or in the conventional sector. And this could be a negative effect. Second, in operation maintenance. If we have more renewable energy plants, we have their higher need for operation maintenance. If we have less conventional energy operation plants, then we have, of course, less operation maintenance need there. So maybe this is another negative effect at a direct level. The same is true for fuel. If we have biofuels, we have more employment created through biofuels. But in countries which have fossil resources, they might face a loss in jobs if the demand for those fossil fuels decrease. The same applies for trade, for technology or fuel. Those countries who are trading, they might face a loss or benefit, depending on their situation. Then the next effect, which could be positive or negative, is, for example, if households have a higher income because they work in the renewable energy sector. They can spend more, they can demand more, so that induce demand and production in the economy, so growth and more jobs. On the other side, those households who had employment in the conventional sector, they might lose their job. They can spend less money, and so they demand less, and the production of consumption goods might go down. Could be slightly negative. And finally, the effect on prices. If we have to pay less for electricity than before, so we have more income available for other consumption goods. If we have to pay more for electricity than before, then we have less money left for consumption. So this could have positive or negative effects on the total economy. That's rather complex, but I think we should take that into account when we talk about renewable energy.
Now, yeah, I mean, when we are about to find a true lumber, but what is a true lumber? So if I like to know just the employment in the RE sector, I have a couple of people who want to invest, and they just want to know this wind park, how many jobs? What do I do?
How many jobs? It depends what you like to know. If you like to know the jobs in the renewable energy sector, meaning those industry that produce renewable energy technologies, then you can look at the gross impact. That's how we call it, the sectoral impact. We look at the direct effects and the indirect effects, what is happening in the upstream industry. And this is called the gross impact of renewable deployment, and this is a sectoral assessment and could be used to show how important that industry is for an economy.
Okay, so I could compare it to the automotive or something that I have in my country.
You could compare it to automotive or to mining or whatever, to agriculture, whatever you like.
Okay.
You learn about the significance of this sector then.
So I see two approaches there. There's the employment factor approach. Oh. Oops, I skipped a slide.
Your question.
I was so sure. Okay. Then just tell me more about all the approaches.
There are several approaches.
Sorry.
We could assess only the sector impacts. Mid-sector, I mean the impacts on the renewable energy sector. For that, we can use three approaches. The employment factor approach, I'll explain a little bit later on, the supply chain analysis, which we do not want to explain it in detail, but it goes back, it looks at the profits and the labor at every level of production and breaks it down, or goes upstream the industry and separates the profits again from the labor input and goes back then the chain until the very end. It's a very detailed analysis, and I think it's very labor intensive and you need detailed data on the companies. It's an interesting approach, but difficult to conduct. So, and then finally we have the input-output modeling approach. We'll hear about it also later. This is the sector study, or the cross-input impact study. Then we have a pure economy-wide impact analysis, where we take into account all effects we have mentioned, the directs, the indirects, the induced, the positive and the negatives. And then we also have a mixture between those two, where sometimes we look at direct effects in the conventional sector and in the renewable sector and compare them. So sometimes we include in this mix negative effects, but not all, so it's not that comprehensive. And
too many approaches. Really? Could you just explain the most important parts?
The most important part, yeah, well, what is important? The question is, what would you like to know? What is you looking for? For example, if you have a lot of time and a lot of money, you can do a detailed approach. But if you would like to have a quick answer, so you can use the employment factor approach. Or if you have a lot of time and like to spend a lot of money, you can do a more elaborated approach, like the macroeconomic or the input-output approach. And then, do you like to know the sectoral effects or the economy-wide effects? So employment factor measures only or mainly direct employment. Input-output analysis focus on direct and indirect. And the macroeconomic modeling is the only one which is very comprehensive and tries to include everything.
So does that explain why I find a lot of a lot of different numbers in the literature. I mean, I've been trying to look at different studies, and everybody seems to be saying something else.
Yes, that's why it happens that there's so many answers, or so many type of studies, and so many answers.
Okay.
Let's take the employment factor approach, which is it's a very simple approach, because you not just, as I just need the capacities installed, you need the generation, and you need employment factors for each capacity installed or for each generation of electricity. And if you have this data, you can do a simple assessment. The only problem is that you need to have a good data about the employment factors. These employment factors are very specific for each country and for each technology. So you need to have them, and if you don't have them for the country you're looking at, you have to adjust them by regional factors. Skip that. That's a simple calculation here is indicated for the employment factor approach. Here, for example, you have to, if you look at manufacturing, say, okay, here's the installed capacity in a region per year. And here is my employment factor per megawatt. So I multiply my megawatt, a person per megawatt, or hours of labor per megawatt, multiply that with the installed megawatt or the installed capacity. And then I use an adjustment factor for the region I'm looking at. And then maybe I look even at the local content of the manufacturing, and local share of the manufacturing. And then I get an idea what the employment might be in my country. And this could be done for any activity, be it for manufacturing, which is exported, for construction, operation maintenance, fuel supply, etc. So this approach is simple, but the requirement is very high for the employment factors we use, which will be multiplied by the capacities of a generation. And this gives you a good idea about the direct employment. The problem is, if you'd like to know more about the indirect employment effects, this approach is not very suited because it does not take into account the very specific structures in your industry structures in your country. For this, we have another
Just
approach.
one comment on this slide, actually. One comment on this slide. Some of you might have seen this table before and maybe not know where they saw it. This is from the energy revolution, and Sven Teske had been here briefly before, and we are still discussing if this is the best approach, but I think for the energy revolution scenario, for a world scenario, this is a very well thought of and rather valid approach. So yeah, that's just as a
good overview.
It gives a very good first estimate.
Yes.
Now we come to the second estimate.
Yes, because we're saying there's another approach with which you can assess the cross effects.
Can I know it all again?
You can change.
I can know it all again.
Please explain what is the input-output analysis.
No, I don't want to be very technical here, but maybe some of you heard, oh, you can do this with input-output analysis. And this is not about industrialized countries, because a lot of countries in the world have the tools and the capabilities, and I'm really addressing you because we've been discussing a Europe bias before. A lot of countries have the tools and the knowledge so that you can actually apply that also in developing countries or emerging economies. Now, what is it? It's an economic tool that has been developed years ago. Wassily Leontev received the Nobel Prize in the 70s, 1973, for this technique. And I just thought it's worth mentioning that this is actually a very well-established economic technique and tool. What it does basically is it puts in a table, it's basically matrices. And in those matrices, it illustrates the effect of additional demands in one industry on all industries. Exactly. And I just brought you, and this is the most technical slide I think that I have, I just brought to you this structure. That's the main idea of the input-output analysis. It pretty much tells you, well, when we are industry number one, then you buy stuff from all the other industries in your economy, Some stuff is not made domestically, so you have to import it. Then some part you have to give back to the government, that is in taxes. You have to pay your workers, and when you're lucky, you have profits, and all that. And there's total products. I don't know what changed that slide. There's the word products down there somewhere. So the whole turnover should be able to pay for profits, wages, imports, taxes, and all the inputs along the value chain that we had on that value chain picture. And to illustrate that a bit more, I brought you a picture where we don't have these abstract industry 1, 2, 3, but we have, for instance, as one industry, as one sector, the wind energy sector. And we know wind energy needs steel, it needs some inputs from wind energy, from what you would call wind energy sector itself. It needs some inputs from construction. Yes, it will need some imports. It has to pay its workers. It wants to make profit. And the total turnover and total output has to be able to cover that. And that's basically the whole secret of input-output analysis. With this tool, the data are provided. I think you have to go back. One more back, yes. Data on this are available for more than 100 countries in the world. I think it's 140 some countries in the world. A lot of countries even provide the data from their own National Statistics Bureau. Sometimes it's also OECD data that you can use. And for instance, we did a study for the Tunisian economy, and they have very nice input-output tables in Tunisia that we could easily use. So this, the reason why we are suggesting this as consultants is that it gives you a framework that matches the framework that your particular country uses for economic analysis when it does it. So you don't have this specialized role of renewables. They're also special. They don't. Everything is different for renewables. No, it's not. It's like we heard this morning. It's an economic sector with all its ups and downs. Tries to become. This is about mainstreaming. Tries to become a normal economic sector, and so we should just treat it and do that. And yeah.
But now you told us how to assess the gross impacts, the effects, direct effects, and indirect effects. But Ulrike, what shall I do if I'd like to know the economy-wide impacts of renewable energy deployment?
You need a bit more money for that.
Yes, I guess so. And time.
And a bit more time also, yeah. But then we can just look at all the different effects that Barbara has just been mentioning. So we can see direct effects and balance them actually with the positive direct effects and the negative direct effects, and the positive indirect effects and the negative indirect effects. This is a condensed version of the blue table that you've just shown a couple of minutes ago. And it is really, really, really hard to keep track of all the effects and put them in like an Excel table or something and just put pluses and minuses in front of it. Because some go through the economy, you have price changes, there's another thing and another thing. And so, well, this is what my company does actually, but we suggest to employ a full economic model, which covers all the sectors, conventional energy sector. It can also capture technological change and technological development, and it captures all the effects that come from either price increases or decreases in your economy. So if people don't have money to go to the restaurants because they have to pay for the electricity bill, then it shows the layoff of waiters and the plus of people who collect the electricity bill, for instance. Yeah, something like that. I don't really want to go through a lot of technical details. Please, if you are interested in like what these economic models can do for you, do approach me in one of the coffee breaks. And there's two important points that I want to make. One is, if you want to say something about this balance, this net effect, you have to compare a world with renewables with something else. Otherwise, you don't get a net effect. You know, you have to compare two worlds, and you have to really think about what will be the future development of my electricity generation without renewables. Do I have to, for instance, in developing countries, you need more electricity, so you have to pay for a power plant anyway. So you have to balance, you know, the conventional power plant and the whatever you want to do in renewables. But the important thing is that you really have to take all costs into consideration. In Europe, that would also mean if the emission trading system ever comes back on its feet, then you have to include additional prices from emission trading, things like that. And then
The question is, how do we measure?
Nice of you to get me back to the question. Thank you. You need to do that with me. I mean, that's really what it is. So as I said, I mean, you need a model that has all the feedback loops between renewable energy, households, firms, finance, the other countries, relation between your country and the other country. Do you import, export? What does it do to the trade balance? Usually you say, oh, if you export more, it's good for or import less, it's good for the trade balance. Well, it's not in Germany, actually, because we export so much that our trade balance is just off the other way around. And so decreasing imports is not a good idea for the German trade balance. And, but the benefit is that you can then also show responses to different policy instruments. So you can show the reaction of your economy and of your consumers and your households to, for instance, a tax break or tax, a tariff, a feed-in tariff, some type of subsidies. So it really captures the full effect.
So if I may ask, which types of policies have you modeled then so far in your model?
Oh, okay. We looked at eco-tax, CO2 tax. We looked at energy taxes as such, or on different, like on electricity, on other. We looked at changes in fossil fuel prices. And of course, we looked at the increase in renewable energy compared to no renewable energy at all. And for those of you who have been there early this morning, these are the numbers that Carsten Sach from the German Ministry has been mentioning, that the net effects are still positive. That also is based on the model.
Okay, so
whoa, here we are. This is our last slides. Thanks for hanging in there. So what did we want you to learn, so to speak? What can models do?
What does this tell? What do they tell us? Well, we learned that the macro and force effects show us how important the renewable energy industry is. We can count the numbers per sector, per renewable energy sector, for now or in the future. Or we know how vulnerable the industry might be, how much we depend on PV or how less we depend on PV. But there are other information we can gain from these approaches.
Yeah, I think, and to come back to Hugo's introduction, I think one of the more important things of all this that we have been throwing at you is that you should support the decision-making process by giving numbers. And the policymakers should at least know there is a lot of methodologies out there. Some are really to be treated with caution, and some only give like a first estimate, some give a very good first estimate. And definitely to our both, I think, experience or hope, data-based decision-making does beat guessing. And I really liked what Hugo said as an introduction, because he said, well, we kind of guessed when we did it in Spain, and we all saw the results. What it can do for the future is also that you can explore a whole opportunity space, so to speak, without having to do the experiment, you know? You don't have to set the wrong incentive and then see how your people react, but you can just say, what happens if I set the prices in this way? Oh, then I at least get an idea that the effects might be rather negative. Now, what if I just do tax breaks? And you see this up and down that you have, for instance, in the United States. And so economic experiments are always something that makes the ones that are experimented with suffer. I mean, always. Somebody's always suffering with experiments. So I think data-based and exploring it with a model economy is really important and can support decision-making.
Yes, it gives us an idea of the potential impacts,
yeah,
or the direction of the impacts.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we are done with that. If you'd like to have more information about the work, about employment impacts or value creation from renewable energy policies, so please have a look at these studies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you mind if we have questions?
No, if there's questions, and if you don't mind if I just at least drink something while I'm answering questions.
Of course. There was the gentleman over here who had a question before, maybe?
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And I just want to elaborate more on the table that you provide on slide 18.
Slide 10.
Slide 18, yes. The example of wind energy.
Oh, there.
Yes, question 8.
Which one? Question 8, and then?
Analysis, yes.
And the next one, I think.
Yes. And I'd like to understand what are the headers. these two.
Repeat the question here.
Just that, elaborate more on this table, how, because I see here the same wind energy is in both the header and the first row, and the first column, and the import
very
taxes.
good. Thank you for that question. That's very good. I paid you for that question, didn't I?
Repeat the question.
Can you repeat the question? Yeah.
Oh, I can repeat the question. Yes, I can repeat the. Can I point here? No, I can't.
Yeah.
Okay. So the gentleman's question was, he was looking at my table and seeing that there's the same stuff written on along the rows and on top of the columns, basically. So the headlines, he's basically asking, why is this headline there twice? And actually, I now realize there's a bit of a typing mistake in there. There should be exactly the same headlines, actually. Sorry for that. That happens sometimes when you do slides. Now, I have to move over there to explain it a bit better. I explained this line, and I totally forgot to explain that line. Now, what does that mean? Okay. This shows what wind energy provides as an input to the different sectors. So it is here you have what wind energy demands as inputs. You have what wind energy asks for, and along that line you have what wind energy gives to other sectors. And wind energy sector gives to the wind energy sector, which is some segments of the wind energy sector produce something special that goes to other segments of the wind energy sector. But you also have wind energy sector gives to exports to other countries. And you also have wind energy gives or delivers to local inventories, which is the wind farm that is built in your country. And now the real mystery of this table, or the real beauty of this table when it has been invented, is that whatever is produced by wind energy for other sectors and for end consumption has to be exactly the same that is produced by wind energy. So there's two ways of reading the production of wind energy. You look at it from the use side, so to speak, where you look at it from the supply side. It supplies to the wind energy, to exports, to inventories. And you look at it from the side where it uses stuff and then produces things. And that is the, let's say, mathematical closure of this system, and that is why this system always then produces consistent numbers. So thanks a lot for that question.
The figures can be the same?
Yes.
Only sums, not
the sums. The
not
sums
linear.
actually, the x2 is the same as the x2 here.
Not the X.
Yeah, yeah. And there is a very elaborate example, actually by Leontiev himself. There's a 2x2 sector example where he really shows it, how he calculates it, and I stole that for the ILO for the Green Job Study, which is coming this summer.
I mean, you can say this looks like a production function. This is all the inputs the wind industry needs.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very simple translation.
Yeah, yeah. Are there more questions?
So actually, thank you for your presentation. It's very nice. And my question is also about this input-output table. And I want to ask if there's a country that who are lack of data, they don't have so many sectors. Like, so how did you balance that table?
Yeah.
You don't have that many sectors together.
Okay, that's also a very relevant question for that methodology. The gentleman has been asking if you have a country that does not have so many sectors, not a very differentiated input-output table, how can you expand, for instance, a sector, or how can you add sectors to it? The very short answer to that question is you can. And I can also, I mean, I think this is going a bit over the head of most people in this room, so maybe we should talk about that individually. But we are just currently doing a study, or there have been a lot of studies done following this question with the green jobs aspect. So people have actually tried to slice the green sector out of each sector, and that's the very same technique. So yes, you can. Yeah, somebody said that.
Maybe you could say these are aggregated data, and you always can disaggregate them.
Yes,
And
but you
that's
do
the
need some additional
Of course.
information. Then you either conduct surveys or you have some other ideas. You can also do similarities between countries. So maybe you have a similar country with a similar production structure and similar population, blah, and so on. Then you can, and maybe they have, you know, more disaggregated data. So you can use that to fix the shares, but I would always also conduct some interviews with people from the respective sector because they know their sector.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have 2 more questions and that we're over, 5 more minutes, if that's okay for you, please.
Yes.
So I have 2 more questions as well. Very important, as you have very well said, is the data, right? Like, because a model is a computer that you put in some numbers and you extract some numbers. So it's important to put in good numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as Michael Renner has said in his presentation this morning, there's a lot of need for standardization of data and gathering good data. So if you somehow could do a wish list of what are the 3 more important things in data that we should do, especially in the perspective of, let's say, developing countries, for example, where maybe they don't have so much personnel in the ministries to do the service and stuff like that, what would you suggest? Like 3 main things about data.
Well, it's really a wish list then.
Yeah, okay,
So
go ahead.
I think, I mean, it's almost the same as we already answered here. Your question, we need data on employment. So in our classification system, we do not have a renewable energy sector or industry. It's somehow integrated in different technologies like electronics or machinery or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't show up. So if we could wish that there might be a separate industry aggregating all the activities in the manufacturing sector for renewable energy, for example, that would be very helpful.
I would wish for anybody who produces data that they tell me what they think they produce. So I don't care what method they apply, really, but tell me or write if you think it's direct jobs, and then what exactly do you think is included. Tell me if you think it's a bit of indirect jobs, just the documentation and the thoroughness of definitions That is something, and maybe also driving definitions to some sort of common understanding, and then apply the definitions, and please let me know what you think it is.
Thank you very much. And just the last question that I have as well is, what are the biggest mistakes that we should try to avoid? Like something that never do this because someone did this and it was very bad.
I know, one of the bigger mistakes would be just like use German data for, sorry, Algeria. It's a totally different industrial structure. You're sitting on a pile of gas, we aren't. I mean, it's a totally different economy. So transferring data without thinking about limitations, without thinking, this is related to what I said before, thinking about what is included, to my experience, really is the biggest mistake.
Well, maybe from the perspective of policymakers, now sometimes a mistake that they take gross impacts, for example, as net impacts, but they should make a clear distinction between these two. They should know that there are sectoral impacts or sectoral figures, and there are economy-wide figures, and that's not the same. I think that should be, that is very important as well.
One more?
Yes?
The policymaker always takes the biggest number, and I don't think big is always beautiful. Okay. No, really. I mean, big is not, the largest number is not always the best. The largest number is not always that gives the most information on what you're actually dealing with. So, but policymakers tend to, and I think we both, and you, and all the analysts that are sitting in this room experience that. Michael, don't you have a bigger number? And we go like, no. And that'll be it.
Especially with jobs.
Especially with jobs, yeah. Yeah.
And it can lead as well to big policy misunderstandings, right?
Yes.
If you
Yes.
make a decision based on a number which is very big to what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's special to disappoint.
Yeah.
That has negative effects on everything else.
Yeah, it really leads, you're absolutely right, Marlene, it leads to disappointments and yeah.
Yeah, mistrust.
Maybe Rabia has
No, I just wanted to thank you very much, and it was lovely, and stop the play. I'm sure that's going to really make a big impact on our policy makers. And now I really would like to invite you to go and start the session, because some people have to leave within an hour. Thank you so much. Maybe you can eat a little bit.
Yes, we should. Thanks for listening to us. Ich nehme mal den da, ja?
It's been amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.